they can conduct. Last session, I think everybody realized there was a significant walkout during that time frame, and the Republicans were able to basically slow things down substantially. So there's a fair amount of unknown, I'll say, going into this session that we didn't expect 2 days ago when this ruling came out. So we're going to work with what we've got in front of us. We're going to continue to advance the priorities that we have going into this session. You're going to hear a little bit of that covering today. The real focus for us for the 24 session is really going to be the state infrastructure funding, support, shelter funding, and improvements to the governor's housing bill, Measure 110 reforms, recreational immunity fix, as well as state funding for industrial lands. It's probably best for me to turn this over to the rest of my team to at least go through their top line items going into this session. And as Patty said, we're going to be doing this each week, and the whole purpose of us doing these webinars is to get more member engagement, to make sure that you know what's top of mind rather, and what needs to have some additional support from our membership. You've been great throughout the last few sessions on this. It certainly has been noticeable having that grassroots support, and we all very much appreciate your ability and willingness to take on roles with contacting your legislators, as well as testifying on any given bill that we have coming up. So I think with that, I'll turn this over to Ariel Nelson.
Hi, everyone. If you haven't met me before, I'm Ariel Nelson. I am your lobbyist for all things housing, land use, and development. Going to run through, it's a relatively short list of bills at this point that we're engaging in most directly. So I'm going to list them off real quick, and then I'll go through them in a little bit more detail. And so the first is Senate Bill 1537. This is the governor's housing production package. We're also tracking 2 committee bills. So in the House Housing and Homelessness Committee, House Bill 4063 is an omnibus committee bill in the House with a number of concepts. And then on the Senate side, in Senate Housing and Development, Senate Bill 1530 is the omnibus bill over there. And then in addition to that, there's a bill that we are supporting, House Bill 4099, and I'll give you some information if you want to support that bill for a hearing next week. That's for a Municipal Development Protection Fund, basically a risk guarantee for SDC deferral. So I'm going to go back through in order and just touch on a little bit more detail. I think most of you, or if you've been tracking the news, have some awareness of Senate Bill 1537. This is Governor Kotek's housing production package. The big pieces of this bill are a repeat from last session. You may remember House Bill 3414, which the League was opposed to when it was introduced, mainly due to the section.
9.
Sorry, could we get a mute
4
from someone running this
again? Your sign-in code is 19.
Okay, so House Bill 3414, the League opposed as it was introduced, largely in part due to a requirement in that bill that cities must grant up to 10 variances or adjustments from their local land use code, mainly siting and design standards that are critical local tools to encourage needed types of housing. We were able, thanks to the support of
well, it says it can be
local
used in the
government
event you lose
experience.
access to your multi-factor.
I'm going to stop you. Somebody's on the call is not muted, and as try as I might, there's 150 of you for me to individually mute. Can you please?
They just
You're
muted.
muted.
Yeah, it looks like they got muted. Thank you. So we were able to get an amendment to that thanks to the support from legislators with local government experience that kind of structurally changed the approach. It's still not a measure that we support, but due to that amendment last session, we ended at neutral. As I think you know, House Bill 3414 did not pass. And so that bill is continuing on in its current form in Senate Bill 1537. So in addition to that mandatory adjustment, there's also the bill would stand up, the current bill, Senate Bill 1537, would stand up a Housing Accountability and Production Office. There's a number of resources and programmatic funding related to supporting housing production, site acquisition, notably $200 million dedicated to infrastructure resources to support housing development. And then I think the other piece of the bill you've probably heard most about is a one-time UGB expansion tool. So the League, is supportive of the infrastructure investments. We're supportive of the UGB investment tool. We're doing a lot of work right now to make sure those tools can actually work on the ground. Right now, as drafted, not all cities can access them. And in the UGB expansion tools situation, it's based on our current analysis, no cities could potentially access that larger expansion tool. So that's a lot of engagement going on there. There are other pieces of the bill that are more minor, but for the interest of time, I'm going to move us along. Again, that was the governor's bill that we are neutral on. Another bill that we're tracking is House Bill 4063, which is the House Housing and Homelessness Omnibus Committee bill. There are 5 elements of this bill that impact cities, a couple technical fixes related to implementing the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, or ONA program that has started rulemaking this year, but passed in statute last session. There's a technical fix to help cities who administer a single unit affordable housing property tax exemption to make their administration more efficient. And then there are 2 sections that we are providing a lot of technical feedback on. One that relates to a developer's ability to opt into new housing regulations mid-application. This concept is also mirrored in the governor's bill and contained in that bill. So we think we've gotten to a good place with that piece. And then there's another section related to middle housing partitions that we are still engaging on that has a lot of technical concerns for cities and other local implementation partners. The Senate Housing and Development Omnibus Committee bill, that's Senate Bill 1530, has a variety of funding, $189.5 million for various state housing programs. We are specifically advocating for $65 million of that would go towards homeless shelter operations funding. This is to keep existing homeless shelters from closing this biennium. We have a number of shelters around the state that are at risk, including shelters that cities and counties had supported with local ARPA dollars during the pandemic that need additional assistance to stay open. The governor is also leading on this ask, so we're aligned in advocacy with the governor on that to keep those shelters open this biennium. Finally, the bill that you have an opportunity to support, House Bill 4099, is getting a hearing on Tuesday in the House Housing and Homelessness Committee. This is a bill that Representative Gamba is sponsoring. It would basically say that if a city chooses, it's optional, if a city chooses to defer collection of system development charges and the developer does not pay, the state will come in as a guarantor and basically purchase the debt from the city or any local government that charges an SDC and then assume the collection responsibilities there. So it's a fail-safe guarantee for cities to encourage cities to defer SDCs. It is something that developers are interested in helping them be able to use their permanent financing for an SDC rather than carrying the loan and incurring interest over the construction loan period. So that's the host of bills that we're watching. There's of course much more detail in and around those, and I'm available. I'll put my email in the chat if you have more questions, and we can get into more detail in future conversations.
Ariel, is there anything you'd like the members to do now on any of these bills? Or are we still on a wait and see how things flush out the first couple weeks? Given that
Things are going to move very quickly. We don't have any committee agendas right now for any of the House committees. I'm hoping those get posted today. I only know about the SDC bill on Tuesday because Representative Gambo's been working closely with cities and really appreciates the support. So, as soon as we hear when things are happening, we will try and get an alert out so that you can weigh in if you want to testify. I will say, I know a lot of you have been spending a lot of time on the governor's housing bill. I cannot repeat enough how invaluable your conversations with your legislators have been. The amount of education and awareness amongst the legislators that I talk to about what cities are already doing, the good work, how cities are working urgently on our housing crisis and on housing production, your infrastructure needs. This is a really key piece. We're really excited to see some momentum around infrastructure funding. This session, I mentioned the resources in the governor's package, but we also expect there to be a package for some direct allocations for infrastructure to support housing. That's most directly based on the survey that LSC put out over this winter. That's going to be a kind of an end of session budget decision. I don't expect that we'll see which projects are getting funded right away. But thanks to your advocacy and your work with your legislators, there's a much deeper understanding of the importance of infrastructure for your communities, what it means for housing, and all of the good work you're doing on the ground. So please keep that up. And as soon as we hear kind of important dates for hearings, we'll let you know so that you can engage.
Thanks, Ariel. And there's a few things happening in the chat. No, we'll do questions at the end when we have time, but I am making note of who's put them in. There is an easy one, which was what was Ariel's last bill number that she talked about. It was House Bill 4099. So thank you, Ariel. If you could drop your contact information in the policy portfolio that you work on in the chat so people know how to contact you, I'd appreciate it. So kind of sharing the stage with housing this session is Measure 110. You've probably seen just as many newspaper articles and op-eds and podcasts about Measure 110 as you have about housing. Scott Winkles is the LOC lobbyist who handles kind of everything that doesn't fit into anything else, including Measure 110. He's going to update us today on House Bill 4002. It's presently a placeholder bill, but this is where we think any modifications to that measure will come into play. So Scott, I can't see you on my screen, but I saw you at one point. If you want to unmute and tell the members what they need to know about Measure 110, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, Patty. Again, Scott Winkles, and I'm your general government and human resources lobbyist. And in that portfolio is all things public health and safety, which would include changes to Oregon's addiction policies. And so if I think everyone on the call should be aware of the league in consultation and in cooperation with the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Oregon District Attorneys Association released 11 recommendations to, sorry, that my dog, the 11 recommendations to address Oregon's addiction community livability crisis. That coalition expanded by one today. The Oregon Coalition of Police and Sheriffs, that's the coalition of police unions, has also added their logo to our recommendations. So we would expect that group to grow with a few other entities. Right now, the conversation is, as Patty said, the conversation is going to be centered in House Bill 4002 that currently exists in the bill tracker on OLIS as a placeholder bill. But we're anticipating a briefing Monday night, informational hearing where amendments will be outlined. Conversations so far have included a number of things that our coalition had requested. So fixes to what we call Boyd-Hubbell. It was an adverse court decision that made it very difficult to prosecute drug dealing offenses. We have fixed language in there that has been in the mix. We've talked about expanded access to treatment. I believe that there's an amendment that would do that, requiring the community care organization, coordinated care organizations, to have treatment contracts sufficient to cover their geographical area. That would certainly be improvement. And talks on expanding the existing statute that allows a person who is under the influence to be held in a sobering or treatment facility from 48 hours to 72. It's an important fix. There are sticking points, however. Our coalition is sticking with the position that the public consumption, possession of a controlled substance should be a misdemeanor, but that a person should have multiple or endless opportunities to receive diversion, which is a means that a person can vacate a conviction if they complete the treatment plan or the correct rehabilitation plan attached to it. I think what we're talking right now about is a deflection program in which a case would be dismissed if a person goes into deflection, which would be certain steps, including an assessment and a connection to services. That is all still fluid. We also have some courts, municipal courts in Oregon, that would like to start their own drug courts. And fortunately, we've had some good conversations with members of the committee that would allow these offensives to go into a muni court. And that's an ongoing conversation. I think, we'll have a lot more information on Monday night, but you do want to put, if you're tracking on OLIS 4002, into your alerts if you're tracking this issue. We also have a number of other vehicles. Those are also existing as placeholder statutes, so we have no shortages of bills to fold this issue into right now. But I think we are making progress. I think right now it's a big package. I don't think anybody thinks nobody's going to get everything they want here, but we continue the negotiation.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the work you're doing on this. If you two could drop your email and contact information in the chat along with the portfolios and subject matters you cover, so those interested know how to contact you, I'd appreciate it. So maybe not making as many headlines as housing and Measure 110. We are also working on some stuff on industrial land development. So Lindsay Tennis handles our finance and taxation portfolio, and she's got an update for you on the work she's doing to try and secure some funding for the state to capitalize a loan fund through House Bill 4042 or Senate Bill 1526. So Lindsay, if you want to give everybody an update on those bills and how it applies to them, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, hi everyone, Lindsay Tennis, your Revenue and Economic Development lobbyist. So House Bill 4042 is a rerun of a bill last year to extend the regionally significant industrial site program housed within Business Oregon. And this program allows local governments to enter into a reimbursement agreement with Business Oregon so they can recoup some of the costs to make industrial land ready for development. This is, almost all infrastructure money. This program expired last year, so Business Oregon is not accepting new applications for it. So it's a top priority of ours to get that program extended because it's really, kind of the only program that's dedicated to helping local governments regain some of the costs to make industrial land ready. There's a huge statewide need for this. Last year, LOC put out a survey related to the semiconductor task force that found, at least $300 to $500 million in statewide need for industrial land development. And so the tax reimbursement portion of the program has been on the books since 2013. The other piece of the program, which has never been funded, is a loan fund. And so that would actually allow for some help with the upfront costs related to infrastructure. That loan fund has never been capitalized. We're asking for $40 million. And this bill is up for a public hearing this coming Tuesday at 1 p.m. in the House Economic Development and Small Business Committee. Please look at the bulletin for more information. The agendas have not been posted yet, but we're asking for as much written testimony to be submitted as possible so that when that bill makes it down to Ways and Means, they can look at all of the wonderful positive support and asks for industrial land. And I think, it's another important point I want to make is there's a lot of infrastructure conversations happening right now related to housing, which is amazing. And we obviously want to capitalize on that for the membership. And we also want to make sure that industrial land and economic development doesn't get lost in that conversation and that legislators understand that that is sort of the other half of the coin. And due to property tax constraints, property tax revenue from commercial development can help offset the cost to provide services to all these new housing units that are going up. So making that push and then also trying to set up kind of a bigger conversation and a bigger infrastructure ask for 2025. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate it. We've got some questions popping in the chat. Please be assured we've been making note of them as a staff and we'll follow them as we get there. We're going to pivot away from industrial land development and I'm going to ask Nolan Plesha. He is a lobbyist who handles energy, environment, broadband, telecommunications, and AI, a whole host of topics.
Do you need more time?
So if somebody, So Nolan, if you can start, I know you've got two bills to update us on today. The first is House Bill 4090, which relates to Energy Facility Siting Council and its authority to require some site certificates. And then also when you finish with that update, if you can let everybody know about what's happening with House Bill 4040, which has some impact on broadband grants. Both things I think might be of interest. So just give us an update on where those bills stand and why we see them as being relevant to city officials.
Yeah, thank you. So Nolan Plesha, the first one, House Bill 4090, kind of really came to our attention a few months ago, but we didn't see any language until just a couple weeks ago. Essentially what this bill would do is for any renewable energy siting or high powered transmission lines being sited on exclusively federal lands would be exempt from the state's FSEC process. This is the Energy Facility Siting Council. That's what FSEC stands for. Any siting on federal lands already goes through what's called the NEPA process, the National Environmental and Policy Act. There is actually a lot of overlap between these two processes, which is why the developers who introduced this bill would like to exempt the state process. The challenge for us here is that there are a lot more things that are looked at during the state process. And while we have agreed that there does need to be a conversation in how we reduce the duplicity between these two processes in order to fast track some of the siting processes. The challenge here is that there has been no conversation with local governments or any other entities prior to the drafting of this bill, and there are some implications to local government's ability to weigh in. Additionally, the NEPA process does not provide compensation to entities that participate in the process. And if you are a local government or other entity who wants to participate in the NEPA process, you have to apply, and then there's no guarantee that you actually have the ability to participate. In some instances where counties have gone through that process, some counties are accepted and other counties are not. The state process, local governments would be compensated. So our goal for this is we are asking them to table this for an interim conversation so that we can have a wide-ranging discussion on how we can get these projects on the ground quicker to avoid duplicate processes, but to continue to ensure that local governments can have a voice at the table for siting projects. The second bill that I am focused on is House Bill 4040. Right now, this is just an economic development placeholder bill. Representative Bynum, who's the chair of the Economic Development and Small Business Committee on the House side, has agreed to allow us to use this bill. And really the main focus of this is to provide a fix to a bill that we passed in 2022 that overhauled the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council to what it is today. And through that process, we created a separate grant application review committee that was intended to provide some distance and some accountability to the process. But it's been very challenging to fill the roles of the grant application review committee since then. And the other challenge is that we are finding that it's going to delay our ability to get some of these federal grants out the door. We already have a public process in the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council. And while providers were the ones who really pushed initially to have this independent process, the League of Oregon Cities did not take a stance on it and didn't care one way or the other back in 22. Providers are now in agreement that we don't need it and that we can just go through the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council. So this should reduce some of that bureaucracy. It's not going to change how grants are sent out. They will continue to be scored based on the merits of the application. And we've been successful in being able to advocate that part of that application. Extra scoring goes to those entities that work directly with local governments. So we are confident that this new process, or by removing the grant application review committee process and instead shifting it to the Broadband Advisory Council, will continue to provide the public transparency that we do continue to look forward to, and to have that independent review from the committee in which the LOC does have a seat.
Thanks, Nolan. Are you expecting any pushback from that broadband grant switch between committees?
So far, no. There are some concerns, and actually the providers that are helping us, they have a couple members that are concerned with the switch. But so far, it seems like most people understand the need, and we should hopefully be able to get this through pretty quickly.
Thanks, Nolan. Appreciate it and the work you're doing. Next up, you're going to hear from Michael Martin on something that impacts one of the league's #1 priorities for the last few years, which is infrastructure funding. We know that almost every city in Oregon needs lots of assistance in terms of infrastructure funding to replace outdated systems and also to provide new ones. So Michael, I think you're going to give us an update today on House Bill 4128, which is an infrastructure study bill. What do the members need to know?
Hi, thank you, Patty. Yeah, my name is Michael Martin. I cover the water, wastewater portfolio. And this bill, House Bill 4128, came initially from the Water Caucus, which is a bipartisan, bicameral group. They're very focused on water infrastructure. And this dovetails in Ariel's briefing at the top with a look to the future, particularly 2025. So the component of this bill that we're currently kind of working through some of the details is the infrastructure community facilities inventory. And what this is effectively a snapshot in time. This was first done in 2021 or completed in 2021. So it's effectively an update to that list and really kind of dives down into more detail, like the list we had provided the legislature from LOC that kind of matches that, hey, over the next 20 years, there's a $23 billion need in infrastructure funding. So what does that look like? So we're working through that. We're supportive of that. And we're currently working through the details of it.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. We're going to wrap up with the specific kind of information on bills today. Thanks, Michael. Already put his information in the chat, but we're going to finish with our Legislative Director, Jim McCauley. Jim, I think you have some updated information on where we stand with speed photo radar and a technical fix out of House Bill 4109.
Right. Thank you. So this thing's feeling like a zombie bill because we thought we actually had this thing fixed at the end of last session. We found out over the summer of 23 that there is a clarity issue, and it effectively comes down to when the changes were made in House Bill 2095 during the 23 session. There wasn't sufficient language in there to make sure that if you are a city that takes or sets up a fixed photo radar site, so essentially the mechanics or the technical stuff goes on a pole, that you wouldn't also have to have a uniformed officer present there staring at the pole. So we have a fix. It's House Bill 4109. It's actually an omnibus bill in transportation with aviation issues and things of that nature. I've been assured by legislative counsel this time, and we've had some other attorneys working on it from a couple of cities to make sure that we're in the right place. But bottom line is, I'm expecting this bill to move forward pretty quickly. And by the time it gets signed, well, actually at end of signing day, we basically have 90 days before you can implement. But bottom line is, we'll get the fix in, and all cities will have access to establishing fixed speed photo radar sites in their communities and help out with public safety concerns that I think all of us have with high speed corridors and people just going way too fast for some of the communities.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. And if you haven't already, the chat sometimes gets hard to manage. Put your information and portfolios in the chat for people to connect to. That's the end of kind of the initial overview of where we stand with the session and some specifics on bills that are top of mind for the lobbyists. I do have 2 questions in the chat as we move into the question and answer section of today. I'll start with them. In the interim, if anybody else has a question, you have 2 options. You can either raise your virtual Zoom hand, or you can put your question in the chat and we will call on you in the order in which they're received. 2 things to note with the questions. I said this at the top, but just a reminder, we will start with city officials first in recognition that those are our primary members, and then go to other members of the public. And secondly, that this is an opportunity if you are going to ask orally when you are asked to unmute, it's an opportunity for 1 question and for questions, not comments. So I'm going to start with Mayor Remy from McMinnville. You put a question in the chat. I believe it's directed for lobbyist Ariel Nelson, and you've asked if Ariel can speak on House Bill 4134. Ariel, I'm sure the mayor knows what it is, but can you give some context behind the bill, and if there is an update, provide that as well?
Thanks, Patty, and thanks, Mayor, for the question. And so the Housing Oregon's Workforce Bill that the Mayor mentioned is one of a few efforts that I kind of related to the momentum that I spoke about for the legislature to actually make some focused investments in infrastructure to support needed housing. this bill is being sponsored by Representative Elmer, and I would say it is the leader in this effort. I think it was really the start of the conversation. And it would target specific infrastructure investments in specific communities, and also include some affordability restrictions to ensure that the resulting housing would benefit the kind of moderate income workforce housing area. Typically that's 80 to 120, 130% of area median income. We don't have a lot. There's very few resources actually in the state right now for that type of housing, and it's not something that we're seeing developed on the market. So just a little bit more on that. There's also an effort from the legislators who make up the Water Caucus. They have also been gathering kind of a list of projects, water specific, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water. And we are also in conversations just generally with leadership to make sure transportation is also in the mix, because all types of infrastructure are critical to developing housing. So we understand that's kind of being taken up as a larger budget end of session discussion. I'm hearing some promising news. Of course, all of this is subject to change, but the floor right now, they're hoping to invest at least 100 million in direct allocations for infrastructure. I've said it before, but want to be really clear, the league is not advocating for any one city's project. We're not able to do that. We don't pick and choose amongst our members, but are very, very supportive of the legislature making an investment package. And what doesn't get funded or make it this session, we fully plan to come back with a robust advocacy next session for a combination of both programmatic funding and direct allocations for infrastructure. Did I miss anything, Michael or Jim, in that conversation? It's been a big team effort, as infrastructure is the league's top priority.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. And I think the best thing about this was we had a pretty short window right before Thanksgiving to try to put together an inventory for leadership. And we had just shy of about 90 cities respond to this. And that's a pretty awesome response in a short period of time, wrapped around the holidays. So we're really thankful that folks responded to this. And I think one of the things that's really important, we've said it a couple of times here, is that we can't physically lobby for those individual projects, but we don't lose sight of the fact of the value of that infrastructure investment, whether it's in water, whether it's in streets, or some of those core needs to be able to develop communities. And we're going to continue to advance this type of inventory into the 25 session for sure, and probably take a fresh look at it as well. So again, this is one of those opportunities where you really responded. And I just want to make sure how much we appreciate that, because it has put us in an incredibly opportunistic place with the legislature right now. This is literally the first time that we really had an interest in funding infrastructure on this kind of a scale, with the exception of some of the ARPA money that they transferred back in 21. So I'm hoping that we can continue to kind of ride this interest for something much longer than this 24 session.
Thank you both, Ariel and Jim. So I've got a few more questions in the chat. And I think this one has already been answered, but in an effort to be transparent, because I know sometimes it's difficult. City Manager Doherty from Hepner had asked a question about House Bill 4042, and that if it passed, would it be open to other governmental entities, publicly funded entities? Does it include ports? Lindsay, I think you did answer it, but for those not monitoring the chat, can you answer that question verbally?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, it's public entities that are eligible for that program. So ports are eligible. There are 12 entities right now that have agreements with Business Oregon to get the tax reimbursement. Most of them are cities, one county, and then I think a couple ports. But I can drop that list into the chat if that's of interest.
That'd be great. Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate it. So the next question we have for Scott. Scott, this isn't related to anything we presented on, but I'm not surprised that we got one. We do have a question from the city recorder in Rockaway Beach. Do we have any updates on fixing recreational immunity in light of what happened with the courts late last year?
Yes. So I would be very surprised if any of you were not tracking this issue, but courts made the appellate court made an adverse ruling on recreational immunity, in which a case in which a person who was hiking on a trail, walking their dog, socializing with a friend, slipped, fell, became injured, the court ruled that those activities weren't recreational in and of themselves, and that that she would have a chance to make the case at trial that she wasn't recreating, she was transiting or transporting between recreational sites. So she was on the Cedar Bay Trail in Newport. So walking the dog was not sufficiently recreational. We do have some fixed language that we have provided to Senator Przansky in the Senate, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. It is our understanding from other members of the committee that language will be included. The bill that we would anticipate him using for this is an omnibus large bill that would cover several issues. That still exists in placeholder. We haven't seen the amendment yet, but we expect that language to be in there at this time. We're also wearing belts and suspenders on this one, and we are working a alternative vehicle and joint transportation with some of those members as well to make sure that we have an alternative in place. So, this, as Jim alluded early in this call, it's a very frustrating time right now. Normally, we would have all of these bills, and most of them would be fleshed out by now. And we waited until right before session to get the bills and found a bunch of placeholders, which is not particularly transparent. So that's where we are. I think we're working this issue the same way we did in 17 and in 09 when we had to do this, make sure the court understood the legislature actually meant there was recreational immunity.
Thanks, Scott. I'm glad to see that you're still fighting for us on this one. So I've got 2 more questions in the chat. So Councillor Hyatt of Ashland has asked if we have any insight on funding the 221 million shortfall for ERDC childcare needs across the state, and addressing those needs for those on the wait list. I'm going to kick that to Jim McCauley.
So I'm going to take a swing at it. As you know, we don't typically deal with childcare funding and things of that nature, but I'll say going into this session, certainly leadership wants to find gap funding for that childcare. That's an important priority for them. I don't know what type of scale we're looking at. And I'll also say, in addition to that, we didn't really talk about it either, and that is education funding. One of the issues that's come up certainly over this last year, our school districts challenged by being able to come up with the funding that they need for increased wages and programs, et cetera, right? I think they're facing the same problem that we have with our own communities and trying to rely on the existing tax structure that we got. So there's going to be a conversation on education funding too that's going to take place over the next year. Not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but we're hoping to be part of that conversation because I think ultimately it will include some kind of way to address property tax. Which is certainly well overdue for some kind of, I'll say, reset or at least a fresh look at it. So that's the best I can offer on the childcare. I don't know how much, but I do know that that's certainly a priority for leadership coming into this session.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. We have a question from Paul Thompson. Mr. Thompson, I apologize. I don't know intuitively which organization you represent, but your question, and I'm going to kick it to Jim as well, is do we have any sense of the potential for a legislative fix to the challenged weight mile tax?
Yeah, so you've probably read in the paper, there is a legal challenge on weight mile that Trucking Association and others are going after. So for those of you unfamiliar with how transportation is funded in this state, is we all pay into the gas tax, right? So if you are driving your own personal vehicle, or if you have a commercial vehicle that qualifies for the weight mile tax, which effectively is 10,000 or higher, you're paying into the system. However, in Oregon, and it's only in a few other states, there's actually a cost responsibility with it. So that means that those heavier vehicles pay a higher tax. And that's something that's been in place for, probably 25 years, perhaps a little bit longer. But what happens in this process is there's a formulated, I'll just say there's a formulated process on how they try to determine the appropriate level of weight mile tax for those heavier trucks to pay. And they effectively have been overpaying for a number of years. And the lawsuit essentially is challenging that overpayment. Those truckers want the money back. There are some bills out there right now trying to advance that repayment effectively. I will say that as we kind of are entering in the 25 session, because that's not that far away, we are looking at a transportation package as well. So if it doesn't get resolved this session, it will certainly be part of the 25 session in terms of trying to make sure that those heavy trucks are paying their fair share and not more, and make sure that whatever we're proceeding with in the future is able to at least capture some of those changes that take place basically every time they go through this cost responsibility study.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. I don't see any other questions in the chat feature yet, but we still have, by my count, about 16 minutes if people have questions. So feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat while I wait to see if anybody does. 3 quick reminders. So first, again, we will do these every Friday. They are recorded. You can come back. We'll post them on our website. So if you miss a Friday, don't feel left out. You can always go to the league's website and you can get a copy of the recording there and stream it from your computer. The other thing I want to point out, particularly because I assume those of you on this call are particularly interested in legislative matters, is the league has built a lobbying 101 toolkit for those city officials who want to try and either learn how or improve their grassroots lobbying advocacy with their state representatives and senators. So how can you better partner with them so that they understand the needs and the challenges facing your communities, and we can work collaboratively to achieve those results? That first edition of the toolkit will be released next Friday, February 9th, through our electronic newsletter called The Bulletin. It won't be fully complete. We're going to roll out this in phases each week of the legislative session, but the key components of it will be available next Friday for you to review. There'll be training videos, informational materials, things that we believe will be helpful to you as you try to build relationships with your legislative partners for the success of your communities. So be mindful of that coming out next Friday. And a last reminder, while I'm still giving everybody an opportunity to ask other questions, is that the league hosts an annual spring conference. That spring conference this year is April 25th and 26th at the Running Y Resort in Klamath Falls. We make a particular effort to try and move the spring conference around to smaller areas in the state to show that we are, in fact, a statewide organization. Registration is open for the spring conference, but it is limited in size. So if you are interested in attending it, I would encourage you to fill out your registration as soon as possible because space will be at a premium, to the point that I know the main conference hotel is already sold out and you'll have to use satellite hotels if you're interested, but there are plenty of rooms there. I'm not seeing any questions. I'm seeing lots of people leave. So in recognition of your time, hold on. I have one more question from Mayor McCardle. He slid it in at the last minute. Mayor McCardle of Independence, I'm going to kick this to you, Jim, as the legislative director. There has been some suggestion that some legislators will not attend this session. Do we have confidence that enough members will be present to conduct business?
Mayor McCardle, thank you for that really easy crystal ball question. Wow. I think we're feeling, I'll say this, I'm feeling good that I still think there will be enough state senators showing up in Salem next week so that we can at least advance the important priorities for the session. I'm trying to remain really optimistic and hope that that's the case. There are a number of really important issues that are really important to the Republicans that need to be advanced and need to have the dialogue for this short session. And I'm hoping that that is where their focus will be, at least for the next 35 days.
Thanks, Jim. And what will be a continuing thing through a short session with 35 days is we have a last minute addition. Lindsay Tennis would like to give a brief update on some state shared revenue information that some of you might find interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. I just wanted to let everyone know that we published the state shared revenue report today, which I know is, that you all need to help fulfill your budget requirements. So if you look in the bulletin, the link is there. And I'm, happy to get into any of the specifics with anybody that wants to reach out to me about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I think, at least to our knowledge, for the first time, we actually have a representative who joined the call. Representative Boomer, you're on. And while this is a league legislative update, you've got 150 captive audiences if you've got anything that you'd like to say in light of being good partners with the state. Or you can just tell me to be quiet and wave your hand.
Sure. Well, first off, this is my first time at this meeting, so a lot of information. Thank you. A lot of information that I need, so that's why I said the highlights would be really a good idea for me to have in front of me as I deal with this legislation as it comes up. And I like the idea that you're working toward making attempts to meet other legislators and in your area in particular, but across the state. We need this information. We need to know what you think. We need to know your needs. I think there's some things that are coming. Hopefully some things will be positive with Measure 110. Hopefully there'll be some heated discussion probably concerning infrastructure. It's coming. We have to do that. I have some cities and unincorporated areas that are really struggling with sewer and water and even electric lines. So there's going to be quite a discussion, and we've got to figure out how better to serve our cities. So please continue to for me, I'm very selfish. Let me know what you're thinking at any time, and I'll be able to better serve my district and also help you out too. So thank you for this, and hopefully we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much for attending, and we promise to work with you as closely as we can. I'm not seeing any more questions. Nobody on staff has texted me, oh my gosh, I have one more thing. So we're going to wrap up a few minutes early today. Please remember to join us next Friday at 1 o'clock. And if you'd like a deeper dive into some of the things you heard about today, please make sure that you read today's bulletin when it comes out. In fact, I think it's already out. It should have come to your email directly. And if you're not receiving it, please feel free to email one of the lobbyists. Their information's in the chat, and we can make sure that we can get you signed up for that bulletin. In the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for everything that you do for the communities that you represent and call home. Have a great weekend.